The year was 2017, and tensions in the eastern Mediterranean had reached a boiling point. Intelligence reports had confirmed the presence of a mobile weapons platform that could deploy devastating strikes against civilian populations within hours of activation. Time was running out, and military commanders knew they had only one shot at neutralizing this threat before it disappeared into underground bunkers. The mission was classified at the highest level, with only a select group of pilots briefed on the details. Among them was Captain Alexander Mercer, a veteran pilot with over 3,000 flight hours in the most advanced fighter jets in the world. What made this mission particularly dangerous wasn't just the heavily defended target zone, but the weather conditions that would force the pilots to fly dangerously low, making them vulnerable to ground fire. The intelligence briefing was brutally honest. There was a 30% chance that not all aircraft would return from this mission. Captain Mercer and his wingmen studied satellite imagery, memorized terrain features, and rehearsed the mission parameters until they could recite them in their sleep. But as any combat pilot will tell you, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and what awaited them would test the limits of both machine and man. The squadron took off under the cover of darkness, maintaining strict radio silence as they approached hostile airspace. The fighter jets were loaded with special ordnance specifically designed to penetrate the hardened structure housing the weapons system. Captain Mercer led the formation, his mind focused solely on the mission objectives and the lives that depended on its successful completion. The pilots knew they would face advanced air defense systems, but the intelligence briefing had failed to identify a new radar installation that had become operational just 48 hours earlier. This oversight would prove nearly fatal. As they crossed into hostile territory, the skies suddenly erupted with anti-aircraft fire, so dense it looked like a storm of lethal fireworks. Captain Mercer's aircraft warning systems immediately went berserk, detecting multiple radar locks from surface-to-air missile batteries. He executed evasive maneuvers while maintaining course toward the target, his years of training kicking in automatically. That's when disaster struck. His aircraft took a direct hit to the right wing, sending the fighter into a violent spin. The damage was catastrophic, with multiple systems failing simultaneously. Every pilot training manual is crystal clear about what to do in this situation. Eject before it's too late. But what happened next would rewrite the book on combat valor. The cockpit voice recorder captured the critical moment when Captain Mercer's fighter was hit. First came the deafening explosion, then the blaring of multiple alarm systems as the aircraft computer detected critical damage. His wingman's voice crackled over the radio. "Falcon 1, you're trailing fuel and fire. Eject. Eject now." The flight control computer was flashing repeated warnings about catastrophic system failures, and the ejection system had automatically armed itself, waiting only for the pilot to pull the handle that would rocket him away from the doomed aircraft. In those desperate seconds, most pilots would have followed protocol and saved themselves. After all, no one would question that decision when an aircraft is literally disintegrating around you. But Captain Mercer made a different calculation in those fleeting moments. The mission timer showed they were just 4 minutes from the target, and if he ejected now, there was no guarantee the remaining aircraft could complete the objective. Through the violent shuddering of his damaged fighter, he could see the ground-based threat that had nearly killed him, and he realized it would target the other aircraft in exactly the same way. Control surfaces responding at 40%. He reported calmly, though the strain in his voice was evident. Continuing mission. His wingman's shocked response came immediately. "Are you insane? Your wing is partially separated. Pull the handle now." But Captain Mercer had made his decision, one that would either enter the annals of extraordinary courage or end with his death. Fighting against the damaged controls, Captain Mercer somehow managed to stabilize the aircraft enough to maintain roughly level flight. Every movement of the stick sent shooting pain through his arm as he battled the forces trying to tear the aircraft apart. The cockpit was filling with smoke from electrical fires, forcing him to lower his oxygen mask. Flight data recorders show that the G-forces he endured while wrestling the damaged fighter would have caused most pilots to black out. Somehow, He remained conscious, pushing through pain and disorientation with singular focus. Later analysis would reveal that the aircraft was literally being held together by just a few critical structural components that could have failed at any moment. With each passing second, the aircraft's condition deteriorated further. Hydraulic fluid was depleting rapidly. The right engine was operating at just 30% power, and the weapons targeting system was flickering on and off. Captain Mercer's breathing was labored but controlled as he manually recalibrated the weapons delivery system, knowing he would get only one chance at the target. His wingmen maintained position nearby, ready to call in search and rescue the moment the inevitable happened. But something extraordinary was unfolding in that damaged cockpit, a display of determination that transcended normal human limitations. 2 minutes to target, Captain Mercer announced, his voice steady despite the cacophony of alarms surrounding him. Whatever happens after weapons release, this target goes down today. The damaged fighter approached the target area at a speed much lower than mission parameters called for. Any faster, and the aircraft would likely break apart from the aerodynamic stress. Captain Mercer had shut down all non-essential systems to conserve power for weapons deployment, flying primarily on backup instruments as the main displays flickered and failed. The target compound came into view, exactly where intelligence had indicated it would be. But now came perhaps the most challenging part. The weapons delivery required a precise approach angle to ensure penetration of the hardened facility. Under normal circumstances, the aircraft's computer would handle much of this calculation, but with systems failing, Captain Mercer had to rely on manual targeting techniques that pilots train for but rarely need to use in modern combat. The flight data recorder shows that Captain Mercer's heart rate remained remarkably steady at this critical juncture, demonstrating exceptional focus under extreme pressure. With his functioning hand, he made microscopic adjustments to the flight path, compensating for the aircraft's damaged control surfaces. Each adjustment risked sending the fighter into an unrecoverable spin, yet somehow he maintained just enough control to line up the approach. Target acquired, manual targeting, he reported. The other pilots in the formation had already delivered their ordnance and were breaking away from the target area. But all eyes were on the damaged fighter as it made its final approach, trailing smoke and debris. At precisely the optimal moment, Captain Mercer released his weapons payload, the sudden weight shift causing the damaged aircraft to lurch violently to one side. The target disappeared in a massive explosion that confirmed a direct hit on the weapons facility. Mission accomplished, but now Captain Mercer faced the seemingly impossible task of getting his critically damaged aircraft back to friendly airspace. The right wing was now visibly separating from the fuselage. Fuel was streaming from multiple ruptures, and the electrical system was failing completely. His wingman, still flying alongside, reported what Captain Mercer couldn't see. The aircraft's tail section was partially detached, and a landing gear compartment had been compromised by shrapnel. Falcon 1, you've completed the mission. There's no shame in ejecting now, his squadron commander urged over the radio. The flight surgeon monitoring vital signs from the command center later reported that he was certain they were watching a pilot's final moments. Yet Captain Mercer's response was simply attempting to return to base. Military analysts who later reviewed the flight data were unanimous in their assessment. What Captain Mercer was attempting should have been physically impossible given the aircraft's condition. The fighter was essentially flying in a configuration that aerodynamic models predicted would be unstable and uncontrollable. Yet somehow, through a combination of exceptional skill and sheer force of will, the aircraft remained airborne, limping toward friendly territory one excruciating mile at a time. The journey back to friendly airspace was a masterclass in extreme aviation. Captain Mercer was essentially flying a critically wounded bird that by all technical specifications should have fallen from the sky minutes earlier. Each passing moment brought new system failures. The hydraulic pressure continued to drop, the electrical system was operating on emergency backup power, and the structural integrity warnings showed that key components of the airframe were approaching catastrophic failure points. Yet through it all, Captain Mercer maintained his focus, making constant micro-adjustments to keep the aircraft stable. Fellow pilots who monitored his return flight described it as watching someone perform surgery while riding a bull, a nearly impossible balance of precision and raw control. As the damaged fighter approached friendly airspace, a new crisis emerged. The fuel situation had become critical, with indicators showing virtually empty tanks. The aircraft's damaged state was causing it to burn fuel at nearly triple the normal rate, and calculations showed that reaching the nearest friendly runway was mathematically impossible. At this point, even the most steadfast supporters of Captain Mercer's decision to continue flying expected him to finally eject. Recordings from the accompanying aircraft reveal them preparing to mark his position for search and rescue teams. Captain Mercer could be heard breathing heavily now, the physical toll of controlling the compromised aircraft evident in his strained responses to radio calls checking his status. What happened next has been studied in military academies worldwide as an example of innovation under extreme pressure. Realizing he couldn't reach the designated emergency landing field, Captain Mercer identified an alternative landing site, an abandoned highway strip that had been used decades earlier as an emergency runway during previous conflicts. This narrow strip offered minimal margin for error, especially in an aircraft with compromised landing gear and unreliable controls. The flight recorder captured his calm voice as he announced his intention to attempt this landing, followed by the shocked responses from his wingmen, who could see just how damaged his aircraft had become during the return journey. As Captain Mercer began his final approach to the improvised runway, the aircraft suffered a complete electrical failure, leaving him without instruments for the most critical phase of flight. Flying purely by visual reference and feel, he maneuvered the failing fighter toward the narrow strip of concrete below. Those watching from accompanying aircraft held their breath, certain they were witnessing the final moments before a catastrophic crash. The landing gear extended only partially. The right wing was now hanging by what engineers would later determine was less than 30% of its structural connections, and the aircraft was yawing unpredictably from side to side. At this point, ejection was still possible and recommended by every safety protocol. But Captain Mercer remained committed to bringing the aircraft home, demonstrating a connection between pilot and machine that transcended normal operational parameters. The video footage of Captain Mercer's landing, captured by a wingman's targeting pod, has since become required viewing at flight schools worldwide. The approach was anything but textbook. The damaged fighter swayed dramatically from side to side, altitude control was erratic, and smoke continued to pour from multiple points on the airframe. Yet somehow, Captain Mercer maintained just enough control to keep the aircraft aligned with the abandoned runway. Military aviation experts who analyzed the footage described it as watching someone thread a needle while riding a motorcycle through an earthquake, an apt description for the extraordinary display of piloting skill unfolding before them. As the aircraft descended toward the runway, those watching prepared themselves for the worst. The moment of touchdown was perhaps the most critical, with damaged landing gear, compromised hydraulics, and an airframe that was literally coming apart. The chances of a catastrophic ground impact were extremely high. The aircraft touched down hard, the partially extended landing gear immediately collapsing under the impact. What followed was a shower of sparks as the fighter's metal belly scraped along the concrete runway at over 100 miles per hour. The right wing, finally surrendering to the forces acting upon it, separated completely from the aircraft during the landing roll, spinning away in a spectacular display that emphasized just how close to complete structural failure the aircraft had been during the return flight. Yet somehow, the main fuselage remained intact enough to protect its pilot. When the aircraft finally skidded to a stop, rescue teams rushed forward, expecting the worst. The cockpit was so severely damaged that they initially couldn't tell if Captain Mercer had survived the landing. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, the canopy partially opened and Captain Mercer pulled himself up and out of the cockpit. Medical teams that reached him found him exhausted, but remarkably clear-headed given what he had just endured. His first question wasn't about his own condition, but rather a demand for confirmation that the target had been destroyed. When assured that the mission had been completely successful, witnesses report that he simply nodded before allowing himself to be helped from the wreckage of an aircraft that engineers would later determine had been unflyable for most of the return journey. The technical inspection of the aircraft revealed the true extent of the miracle Captain Mercer had performed. Over 70% of the critical flight control cables had been severed or damaged. The hydraulic system had lost more than 90% of its fluid, and key structural components had been stressed beyond their design limits. Engineers who studied the wreckage were unanimous in their assessment. The aircraft should have broken apart long before reaching the emergency landing site. The fact that it had remained controllable enough to be landed under such conditions defied technical explanation. One senior engineer summarized the sentiment of the inspection team when he stated, "We designed these aircraft to be resilient, but what kept this one flying wasn't in our blueprints. It was in the cockpit." In the days following the incident, military analysts pored over every second of flight data, try to understand exactly how Captain Mercer had accomplished what many deemed impossible. The technical aspects were certainly impressive. His moment-by-moment adaptations to the changing aircraft condition demonstrated exceptional flying skill. But what fascinated experts even more was the psychological dimension. The decision to continue the mission despite catastrophic damage, and then the determination to bring the aircraft home when ejection would have been not just acceptable but expected. This combination of technical mastery and mental fortitude has since been recognized as a rare and valuable trait that goes beyond standard combat training. The mission itself remains largely classified, but the impact of destroying the weapons facility was later revealed to have prevented an attack that could have claimed thousands of civilian lives. This context adds an additional dimension to Captain Mercer's decision to continue despite the damage to his aircraft. He understood the stakes of mission failure in human terms. When later asked about his decision not to eject, his response was characteristically straightforward. "The mission wasn't complete, and I still had an aircraft that would respond, even if just barely. As long as those two conditions existed, ejection wasn't an option I considered." This statement has since become something of a mantra in certain military aviation circles, embodying a commitment to mission completion that transcends personal safety considerations. Perhaps the most significant legacy of this incident has been its impact on fighter pilot training programs worldwide. While ejection protocols remain unchanged, pilots are still instructed to abandon aircraft with catastrophic damage. Training now includes more scenarios where pilots must assess whether a damaged aircraft remains controllable enough to complete critical mission objectives. Simulation programs have been updated to include scenarios based on Captain Mercer's experience, challenging pilots to make the same real-time assessments and adaptations he made during those critical minutes. These training modifications have already proven valuable, with at least 3 documented cases of pilots successfully completing missions and returning to base in significantly damaged aircraft that might previously have been abandoned. Beyond the technical lessons, Captain Mercer's story has become a powerful symbol of human potential under extreme pressure. Military psychologists have studied the incident extensively, trying to identify the mental attributes that allowed him to remain functional despite the overwhelming stress. His ability to compartmentalize the danger, focus exclusively on immediate technical problems, and maintain decision-making clarity has become a case study in crisis management. When decorated for his actions, Captain Mercer's citation noted not just the extraordinary flying skill displayed, but the moral courage to make decisions that placed mission above self when such decisions carried the highest personal risk. As one senior officer noted during the ceremony, technical skills can be taught, but the kind of courage displayed that day is something far rarer and more valuable. What we've witnessed in Captain Mercer's story transcends ordinary courage. It reveals what humans are capable of when purpose outweighs fear and determination overcomes impossible odds. Think about your own life for a moment. What missions do you abandon when the alarms start blaring? What goals do you eject from when systems start failing? The difference between those who achieve extraordinary things and those who don't often comes down to this question. When everything says quit, what voice do you listen to? Captain Mercer's damaged fighter wasn't kept in the air by aerodynamics alone. It was sustained by an unbreakable will that refused to accept failure as an option. That same power exists within you, waiting to be called upon when your own crucial missions face unexpected challenges. The next time you face your own damaged wing or failing systems, whether in your career, relationships, or personal goals, remember that the manual might say eject, but sometimes the greatest victories come from staying in the cockpit just a little longer. I challenge you right now. Identify that one mission in your life that you've been considering abandoning because it got too difficult. What would happen if you approached it with the same determination that kept that fighter in the air when physics said it should fall? What might you accomplish if you refuse to eject from your most important goals? This story isn't just about extraordinary courage in combat. It's about the extraordinary potential that exists in each of us when we commit fully to what matters most. If this story of unbelievable courage inspired you today, hit that subscribe button and activate notifications to join our squadron of viewers who never miss our declassified missions and untold military stories. And let me know in the comments, what's the toughest mission you refuse to abandon, even when everyone told you to eject? Your story might just inspire someone else to stay in the fight when it matters most. Until our next mission briefing, remember, true valor isn't about being fearless. It's about continuing the mission even when the fear is overwhelming. I'll see you in the next video.